Parker Palmer is a writer, teacher, and activist. He is the founder of the Center for Courage and Renewal and holds a PhD in sociology from the University of California at Berkeley, if you've heard of such a place, such an obscure place. He has written 10 books that have sold over 2 million copies, some of my very favorites, like Let Your Life Speak and Healing the Heart of Democracy. And I am an annoying super fan, so I came all the way to glorious Madison, Wisconsin to talk to him. Oh my gosh, it feels so good to sit down and see your lovely face.
Oh, thank you, Kate. It's so good to be with you.
I wondered if we could start with a season that you had that was a dark night of the soul, of wondering what is going to happen to our communities, that feeling of frayed, sad individualism you saw everywhere. Because I'm kind of wondering if we're in a moment like that right now.
Well, how much time do you have?
I got at least an hour.
Part of my life story is 3 deep descents into clinical depression, 2 in my 40s, 1 in my 60s. In all 3 of those instances, the mix that went into the making of that dark night of the soul was partly personal, internal questions, issues, wrestling matches with things like vocation and aging and relationships. But it also had a worldly context. It had a political context. And I could point to those various eras of my life and people would quickly understand, oh, well, if it wasn't the current threat to democracy in the United States, it was all the threats that came with the Vietnam War, or all the threats that came in the middle of economic global collapse, or all the threats that came with the impending destruction of our environment. I mean, these things bear in on us, don't they? And there's no way to live a life that's encapsulated and protected from all of those destructive dynamics. Depression isn't just about feeling lost in the dark. It's the sense that you've become the dark. You know, when you're lost in the dark, you can negotiate the darkness, right? If I'm lost in a dark room, I can feel around. Maybe there's a door here, maybe there's a window shade over here, maybe there's a light switch somewhere. I can find some way to kind of deal with the situation I'm in and keep a little hope alive, because maybe there will be a little light that I can bring into the room. If you're not lost in the dark, but you've become the dark, there's no negotiating it. You're it. It's you. That's all she wrote. And I've been there a few times. It's a devastating place to be.
It really makes me think of experiences in my own life where I've seen people be genuinely overwhelmed by despair, and that it can swallow up days and weeks and years. And then also moments where some people had tremendous sadness. Like I had a friend whose husband died, but all the sadness had all kinds of meaning in it. But then after his death, it sort of morphed into something else, and she became incredibly despairing about the environment. And it took me a while to be like, why are you, I mean, we're all upset about single-use plastics. Why are you so upset about single-use plastics? I think it was part of this exchange of agency, like just trying to figure out, if I can't act in this one way, and then I want so desperately, now I feel acted upon by these bigger forces. Mm-hmm. Imagine we're all just trying to find the right, like, how do we set the dial for what we are able to do? Mm-hmm. And it sounds like both personal, I love your framing of like both personal reasons and geopolitical reasons can kind of like adjust the volume on that.
Right, because it does, some of these feelings do root, don't they, in this sense we carry around in, quote, normal life, that I'm in charge of what happens to my life. And I'm probably partly in charge of what happens to your life, you know, as we sit here together. And it's a lie. I'm not in charge of any of that.
Yeah.
I can contribute to a dynamic in my own life or between you and me. I can contribute in a life-giving way, or I can contribute in a death-dealing way. Those are choices I do have to make. But but in the kind of depression we're talking about, as you just suggested, your sense of agency is gone. And so one has to find some way, especially hard when you're just utterly down and out, to reclaim a little sense of agency. I was talking with this therapist who said, what I want you to do in the midst of this despair you have about being nothing and nobody and of no use, a worm, I want you to start keeping a journal. And I just, drew whatever energy I could and did the fair imitation of a depressed blow-up, which isn't a real blow-up because you just don't have the energy for a real blow-up. But I said, are you out of your mind? I can't write a sentence. I can't read a page. I get lost in the very act of trying to articulate a thought or absorb a thought from the outside. And he said, well, I'm not talking about a lengthy discursive journal. I'm talking about a journal of tiny achievements. And I said, what does that mean? And he said, well, for example, you told me that you were finally able to get up at 10:30 this morning, having spent most of the night and morning just in a darkened bedroom, hiding under the covers. He says, write that down in a journal. You also told me that today you were able to get out on your bike, which is your preferred mode of exercise because you don't have to talk to anybody when you're on a bike. And in this state, you're incapable of even a simple conversation with a neighbor. You were able to ride your bike for 10 minutes. Write it down. Tomorrow, start a new page with a new date. What you're going to find, if you are faithful to this journal of tiny achievements, you're going to find that you're getting up a little earlier from time to time. You're going to find that you're riding your bike a little longer from time to time. Day's going to come when things are going to start feeling a little more normal from time to time. The pattern of depression is sawtooth. It's sometimes better, sometimes worse, day in and day out. Now, I was a guy for whom an achievement was writing a new book, selling 100,000 copies, getting great reviews, being invited to give talks and workshops all over the country. That's how I spent 40 plus years of my life. These didn't seem like achievements at all. But I today, to this day, in good mental health and in times when things are a little dark, I have recalibrated my sense of what an achievement is. And I embrace myself over much smaller achievements. And at age 85, when I probably don't have another book in me, and I don't have a lot of post-COVID travel in me, this is probably as important as it was to honor my tiny achievements as it was when I was in deep depression. Wow. It's a tool.
Yeah.
And for me, it worked.
I'm always obsessed with these ways of describing the space between everything is possible and nothing is possible. Because I spent so much time studying everything is possibilism, religious cultures, which then morphed into like wellness, self-help world. And then I have so much sad, intimate awareness of the nothing is possibilism, having grown up in a home with a lot of clinical depression. But this space that you're describing is so exciting to me because there's so few ways to be honest and concrete and not absurd about it.
You're reminding me, Kate, of a poem that I wrote. Poetry has been a great gift in my life, reading it first and then writing some over the years. And in the middle of one of my depressions, I took a retreat out in the country because there was the mother house of the Sisters of Loretto was in Narings, Kentucky. And there was a sister there whom I had come to know, a wonderful woman named Elaine Prevolet. And I wanted to just hang around for a week and get spiritual guidance from this very grounded person who would never say, cheer up, things are going to get worse. To which my answer always is. So I cheered up, and sure enough, things got worse. And so there is,
I've actually never heard anyone say that. That's so funny. Cheer up, things are going to get worse. That's so funny.
yeah, people's slip of the tongue, is very telling.
Please send that to me in a voice memo someday.
I shall. I shall. So there I am out in the country, and I'm walking down a country road one day, no traffic. Plowed field over here, plowed field over here, sometime in the late spring. And I have enough of a farm background from my father's family in Iowa to know that that field has been harrowed. And so that word was living with me, harrowed.
And what does harrowing mean for people who are not as farmy as we are?
So harrowing is when you take a tractor and a plow with round blades, or sometimes just fork blades, and you drag it across the field to loosen up the soil, to move things around prior to
I see.
Finer plowing and planting. So it's a harrowed field is a jumbled field, and it's the first step in a process. So this poem came to mind. I worked on it slowly over the next few days, and it's lived with me forever. I have it memorized. I can usually come up with it, especially when there aren't any bright lights or cameras going. Let's see how it goes. It's called Harrowing. The plow has savaged this sweet field, misshapen clods of earth kicked up, rocks and twisted roots exposed to view, last year's growth demolished by the blade. I have plowed my life this way, torn up a whole history until my face is ravaged, furrowed, scarred. Enough, the job is done. Whatever's been uprooted, let it be seedbed for the growing that's to come. I plowed to unearth last year's reasons. The farmer plows to plant a greening season. That poem has manna in it for me, power, elemental power. It told me what I needed to do with this harrowed face, this harrowed heart, this harrowed body, this harrowed field. And it was all about planting a seed, if I ever had one, and then another one, and another one, to recover again that sense of agency, that tiny achievement, and let it grow.
Oh, the part that really hit me was the undoing. What was the word about like undoing last year's reasons? Is that what you said?
Yeah, the farmer, I plowed to unearth last year's reasons.
Yeah. Because so much of the pain that we experience is the stories that aren't quite coming true, or
Like it's my fault or something.
Yeah. Like the people that should have loved us better, frankly, things that should have happened, things maybe we should have done. It's just, there's so many things to undo, to to pull up to have anything new happen.
Yeah, and I sit here now, Kate, at age 85, and truly I can look back and understand the way in which everything belongs. I think that's maybe a Richard Rohr phrase.
It sounds like Richard Rohr, doesn't it?
It does, yeah. And everything had a place, everything had a role, and I was at the time doing the best that I knew how under the circumstances. For me, it's just that simple. If I can understand my life as I lived it on the terms with which I was living it at the time,
Yeah.
there's a lot of liberation in that. And I think forgiveness is about liberation, liberating myself and liberating the other people in my life from whatever burdens I might want to put on them because I haven't got my act together.
I wonder, in the same way that you were able to have compassion for yourself for like a personal depression and sort of a generalized sadness about where we're going as a democracy, I wonder if we could give people some hope who just feel like pretty tired going into this political season. How are we supposed to grow away from our like sad independence and into caring about other people when other people are so crazy? Or you can insert any word. When other people make me feel misunderstood, or when other people don't seem to share any of the same values that I do, and we're always at odds.
One thing I want to say quickly before I forget it is that so much of what you've described, I think, is people operating off the narrative offered by the mass media. And I'm not talking now about the mass media truth-telling, the mass media lying, all those debates, about fake news, blah, 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 though there is plenty of fake news out there. And there's twisted news, there's biased news, et cetera. I'm just talking about the big picture that the news media, online and in print, deliver to us every day, and people absorb every day, which somehow then forms people's sense of the reality in which they're living. But wait, the reality in which you're living is in your home and out the front door and down the street with neighbors and, at some voluntary associations you belong to and the interactions you have at farmers market and the conversations you have with people who are struggling with their own lives, which aren't highly ideological, but they're just about things like people dying and people suffering and people not getting the job they wanted, or people getting the job they wanted, or finding the apartment that they wanted, and finding a way to put food on the table. If we need to recalibrate our sense of what's the reality in which we're living, number one. And I find that when I do that by walking out my front door, walking through the park, sitting in a playground, talking with parents and their kids, that things look better than they did in the Wisconsin State Journal or on the Daily Beast or the Huff Post, right?
Yeah.
So that's one thing.
So if you want to feel less absurdist about the world, talk to more, reduce things to the scale of your actual life.
A second thing I would say is, there's a deep challenge here to the mythologies that I carry with me about how history unfolds and about what this country is all about. Ask any thoughtful Black brother or sister if the United States today is in just a lot worse shape than it was 250 years ago, or 200 years ago, or 150 years ago, or 100 years ago, and the answer you will get is, no way. This is just the way the United States is. We have always had this streak of cruelty that runs through our culture. Have we had streaks of brilliance and of generosity? Absolutely. But there's always been this streak of cruelty, too. Our entire economy was founded on the obscene, evil enslavement of men, women, and children whose families were destroyed generation after generation after generation. I've spent some time right out of graduate school as a community organizer in Washington, D.C., walked away from an academic appointment after I got my PhD to try to respond to the racial crisis of the late 60s and early 70s. Community organizing in D.C. around issues of racial justice was my first introduction to serious engagement with Black activists. And I have learned from them that there is not only the fierce urgency of now, which we're all called to, there is also the honoring of the ancestors. I mean 14 generations of ancestors who used the tiny, tiny degrees of freedom they had to plant this seed and that seed, sometimes in a religious context, sometimes in a secular context, and to keep planting and to keep planting, and to grow this crop into changes in the lay and the law of this land. And one thing I absolutely refuse to do as a human being, and this is where I think nice middle-class Americans have to get just a little bit feisty and pissy. I refuse to succumb to the politics of divide and conquer. I refuse to listen to those noxious voices from on high who are telling me, look, distrust that person, hate that person's up to no good. That's BS. And it's an ancient political strategy designed to disempower me from citizenship, because if I can no longer have a network of trust among those, at least among those people with whom I walk out the door and meet, I can't be a citizen of this democracy. Yeah. You can't be a citizen of this democracy just by running a solo act called voting once every 2 or 4 years. You be a citizen of this democracy by engaging with others around shared concerns and the direction you want the country to take. Will you save the day? No, but no day has ever been saved by an individual act. And here's the big frame. We live as humans, always have lived, always will live, in what I call the tragic gap. And it's tragic not just because it's sad, but because it's inevitable. Mm-hmm. In the Greek sense, in the biblical sense, in the Shakespearean sense, tragic isn't just sad.
Yeah.
It's built into the nature of things.
We're living inside of forces we cannot control.
We're living inside of forces we cannot control, and yet our job is to keep putting one foot after the other in that tragic gap, attempting to achieve something better. So the gap between what is and what could and should be is huge. It will never close. But our job is to keep from flipping out into corrosive cynicism, which says, oh, I see how the system works. I'm just going to game it, get what I can, and let the devil take the hindmost. Or on the other hand, flip out into irrelevant idealism, which is just trust God, everything will be fine. Or trust, I don't know, some countercultural guru and everything will be fine. Both of those sound like radical opposite ways of coming to life, corrosive cynicism and irrelevant idealism, but they function in exactly the same way. They take us out of the gap. Uh-huh. They flip us out of the gap. Our job is to keep putting one foot after another, stepping forward in that tragic gap, doing what we can every day, recording it in our journal of tiny achievements, and understanding that it counts. Yeah, it matters. Because there is no social change in the history of humankind that has been accomplished in one fell swoop. Every one of them has been accomplished by a million tiny steps over usually generations. And recovering our democracy is a generational job.
Wow. If we think of ourselves as a very sad, but also kind of broken in certain parts person, it can feel like, well, that's not the person who is going to be able to help very much, do very much. We're already consumed by all the things that have made our lives difficult or tragic in the first place. We're already too aware of the fact that we are living inside of like cross currents of things we can't fix. Kids with intractable problems, parents with intractable problems, jobs with intractable problems. But you and I both agree that there's something weird that happens to the brokenhearted, is that there's like a kind of an inside outness that happens that can make us maybe exactly the right people to live in unfinished times.
I think so. This level of engagement, either in politics or in personal and communal life, seems to me to require the kind of opening that can come through brokenheartedness. Absolutely so, just as you said. I've thought a lot about the fact that there are two ways for the heart to break. It can shatter into shards and just lie useless on the floor, never to be put back together again. Or you can exercise your heart on a daily basis by taking in the little losses, the little deaths, the things that feel hard to absorb, the news that's hard to absorb. Take it in, let it exercise that muscle the way a runner exercises muscles so they won't snap under stress. And the heart has a chance then to become so supple that it will break open into largeness rather than apart into shards. And, the most trustworthy people in my life are people who have known brokenheartedness and who've known it at depth. Those are the people I can go to and say and tell it the way it is for me. Yeah. And in the process, experience healing. They don't have answers for me any more than I have answers for them. But we can have a conversation rooted in brokenheartedness and honesty about that experience that goes somewhere humanly, right? And that makes me feel, and I think makes them feel, welcome to the human race. That's to me, that's the best words I can say to anybody. Well, whatever it is you're feeling, whatever it is you're wrestling with, welcome to the human race. This comes with the package of being human.
Do you think this quality of when you meet somebody and you know they've really been through it, and it opens up kind of an emotional generosity around life, do you think that that's something that more people age into, or is it still like a secret club?
There's a phrase in the scripture, I'm not enough of a Bible student to know exactly where it's found, about Jesus, that he was a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. And I've always felt, despite all the mythology around Jesus and all that that I can't trust about some of his current representatives on the face of the earth, there's something deeply trustworthy about that description. And if a person were really living into that description, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief, that particular person would not be busily at work spreading around more sorrow and more grief in the midst of American democracy and a world scene that is drifting slowly back to the fascist pole of life. You just wouldn't, because you know something that would keep you from going there. So yeah, we can talk about trustworthy Christians as well as trustworthy members of the general population. Unfortunately, I see people aging toward bitterness and resentment and the closure of minds and hearts. I wrote this little book about grace, about On the Brink of Everything, Grace, Gravity, and Getting Old. My publisher wanted a softer title than Getting Old. And I said, no, it's about getting old, for goodness sake.
We're lucky we all get to do it.
Exactly. Congratulations. But in that book I said something like old is just another word for nothing left to lose. So, and that's how I feel, I told a friend the other day who asked me, well, what about next steps in your life, Parker? I said, look, I have nothing left to prove, and if I do, I don't have time to do it. So I'm enjoying life. I'm here, for the ride. I want to continue to contribute my gifts. So it's not all ride, it's also work. But I want to do it with a sense that I don't have anything left to protect or cling to or demand that the world not mess with, Yeah,
that's right. Living in hyper-reality, when we know too much and not enough at all times, we all have a vague awareness about almost every topic, but typically not enough to do anything on like a policy level about it. You're a big advocate too of shutting it down and living to scale, taking a break, not inundating yourself with so much information. Could you talk our lovely listeners into a rest, into just simmering down for a second?
I'm grateful to the Quaker tradition. I've been hanging around with Quakers since I was 35, I guess, for 50 years. And I've learned a lot from them about the power, the value of silence, which I did not learn in my mainline Protestant upbringing.
I like talking, you like talking.
Yeah, right.
More of a talky talk
Right.
kind of.
Yeah. And whenever the minister said in the church I grew up in, the Methodist church, now we'll have a moment of silence, the organ broke into loud chords, for 60 seconds so that none of us could hear what we were thinking, which was precisely the point.
Oh my gosh, my son said something like that the other day. He goes, why do you keep, he said it so sweetly, but he was like, why do you keep bringing me to this place where they keep saying, listen to God, but everyone's talking all the time?
Exactly. Oh, I like that a lot.
I was like,
Tell your son,
yeah.
high five.
I
Right?
know.
Yeah, it's so good. No, exactly so. So I learned a lot from the Quakers, who don't worship the silence, they worship in silence, and what they're doing is listening. Yeah. And Quakerism has its problems, just like every religious tradition or sect does. But I have seen wonderful things come out of that silence where people kind of touch a bedrock truth. It emerges in vocal ministry, as Quakers call it, and the community starts happening around those deeply held concerns, because so often when we speak from that place of depth,
Yeah.
we're tapping into the aquifer that feeds all the wells, and it turns out that other people, as they tap in, are feeling that same thing or getting that same message, and then we're poised to do something that's real and could well make a difference in the world.
Yeah. I sort of wanted to, as we close, it's awkward to, I'm just going to read you to you for a moment. Your habits of the heart. Understand that we are all in this together. Develop an appreciation for the value of others. Cultivate the ability to hold tension in life-giving ways. Generate a sense of personal voice and agency. Strengthen our capacity to create community. I do feel like we, these like beautiful little ways that we have to get rewoven into each other is going to be, it's going to require a lot of like discipline and belief that other people are doing it too. Because otherwise I think we will get swept away by the tides of the algorithmic overlords. And we won't be able to see each other anymore.
Kate, as you well know, when I wrote those words in Healing the Heart of Democracy, I set them in the context of what Alexis de Tocqueville said about American democracy, this great 19th century interpreter of the American experiment, as it very much was at the time he came to this country from France in 1830 or so, I think it was. The country was very young. It was fresh and raw, and a lot hadn't been worked out, but he wrote 2-volume work called Democracy in America that a lot of scholars will say is still among the very best things ever written on this topic. And he rooted all of this habits of the heart stuff in the voluntary associations to which Americans belonged. And somewhat against his will, because he was from France and he wasn't real keen on Christianity, he realized, among those voluntary associations are the churches. So if this is going to happen, if these habits of the heart are going to be actively cultivated, we have to look to those local venues of life in which people live and move and have their being on a daily basis, not on that grand scale, but in the microcosm of our lives, and trust the fact that there are millions upon millions of those microcosms, and do what we can to enrich the human scale life in the microcosms that we inhabit. So what are you doing with your kids along the lines of these habits of the heart? What are you doing with your neighbors along the lines of these habits of the heart, which are an interlocked set, as you know. It's not just 5 sort of data points. What are you doing with the church you belong to, which may be in need of someone standing up in the pews and calling BS? You know, it could be in the workplace. There's so many venues of common life that are left. Do we have to enrich them? Are we bowling alone these days? Yeah, we are. I get that. But I don't like seeing that argument phrased as if it's all done, it's all over. One of my favorite quotes recently comes from a woman whose name I believe is Cheryl Eiffel, who was the head of the Legal Defense Fund of the NAACP. She stepped down after a long and honorable tenure in that role and trying to advance civil rights causes and doing a very good job at it. And as part of her farewell talk, she spoke a line that I hope always to remember. She said, "I've read a lot of Black history in detail. I've read a lot of narratives of my people and how life has unfolded for them over the centuries. And never, ever, at the end of one of those narratives have I seen the phrase or heard the phrase, 'and then we gave up.' I'm not ever going to speak that phrase either about my own life, about my own engagement."
Parker, what a ridiculous joy to have this conversation with you. I'm open to you bossing me around for at least the next 5 to 10 years. Feel free. Call me anytime.
Yeah, I don't think so, Kate.
It's too late. I've conscripted you.